Also on Monday night, Trauma, the three-parter starring Adrian Lester and John Simm from Dr. Foster writer Mike Bartlett. This aired consecutively over 3 nights. John Simm starred as Dan Bowker, a sort of harassed working-class father of 3. He gets laid off in one of the very first scenes. Is he like a metal worker or something like that?
I assumed. You had to do a lot of assuming with that.
They did show you like the something metalworks or something.
Yeah,
like
but
that.
I'm not really a man's man. I mean,
not really a reader, because they did actually have the sign of where he worked.
Well, then why are you asking me for if you know?
Because I watched it a lot longer ago than you did. Jesus.
I'm already annoyed.
Adrian Lester plays John Allerton, a respected surgeon and part-time rock climber. So their paths cross when Dan's son, his oldest son, 15-year-old Alex, is rushed into the hospital where John works. He's called in, even though it's not his night to work, it's his birthday. He's had a couple of glasses of wine. That might again later. Dan sees his Alex on the operating table, on the sort of trolley as John's wheeling him in to give him sort of a full scan. He says everything will be fine. Then Dan goes in, sees John operating on him, sees him panicking, and later Alex dies on the table. And from then on, Dan is convinced that it's John's fault, even though Alex was stabbed by this lad who sort of fully admitted that he was guilty. I think the fact that the police specifically said that the boy didn't mean to kill him furthered Dan's wrath towards John, and then he sort of starts stalking him. He gets a job at the hospital cafe, which then John sort of makes sure that he loses soon after. The final act sees Dan sort of try and kidnap and hold at knife point John's family in an attempt to get to the truth. We watched this sort of differently. I watched this all three sort of chunked together. I started it sort of Friday afternoon, finished it sort of Saturday evening. So within, say, a 24-hour period, I watched all 3 episodes.
And I watched it when it went across ITV, yeah. Uncharacteristically, I've been quite vocal about this on Twitter. And I didn't hate it. But I also didn't like it very much. It was like the reasons why Dan was so hostile. It was like he had this Sherlockian...
Did I explain it to you then?
Yes, but it was before that. Well, no, I don't know. I still don't know if that's the reason. That's a good surmise. But he did this Sherlockian thing where he would go, "Oh, you're fiddling with your hands," and then another patient's son did it as well. You're moving your hands weird. You don't want a surgeon to be doing that with their hands.
I agree with you. That was a bit clunky. What I would say in terms of the motivations, it was almost like a class thing as well as sort of.
Well, that irritated me a little bit. I tell you what, it was 2 things it reminded me of. It reminded me of The Replacement,
which I thought as well, and I actually would say that this was better than The Replacement in the fact that I thought it was Mike Bartlett, who is a playwright first, before he started writing TV. It didn't go sort of fully bonkers, but it climaxed in the sort of most bonkers.
It reminded me of that. And it reminded me of the Frank Grimes episode of The Simpsons. That's what it reminded me of. I didn't really at any point sympathise with John Simm, despite him going through what they refer to quite often and quite rightly as every parent's nightmare. For some reason, I just didn't ever sympathise with that character. I think John Simm is an incredible actor who I've loved for years, and I didn't care enough about him in his situation. I kept thinking, if this was made a few years ago, it would have been about a man going through grief and a cover-up and what that does to the doctor and what that does to the family. Instead, what we got was almost like this Hollyoaks type plot or heightened EastEnders plot where things.
I get what you mean. What I would say is that I don't think it was ever trying to be anything sort of. I mean, there was some interesting avenues it could have gone down, and I thought Mike Bartlett sort of teetered on sort of almost sort of talking about the NHS, that like John was called in on his night off, and at the end John finally admits that he did do something wrong, there was something else he could have done, and that he has to retrain, but he would go back to his former position because they need doctors, because the end, and that was all very interesting. But I sort of see what you mean. This was more of a thriller than a drama about sort of loss and things like that, like if Jimmy McGovern had done it. This is like
exactly.
This was pitched though as a thriller. This was pitched as a thriller. So if you don't like thrillers like that,
well, I do ordinarily.
I get what you mean about sort of needing to be compelled by the characters, but I think this was more a story-driven thing than a character-driven thing, and I enjoyed the story. It was one of those I would liken, like I did to Strike, to almost like a holiday book. Like it's one way you take it away, you read it, it sort of engages you while you're there, while you're sitting in the sunshine. It's sort of something to do, but you'll forget about it as soon as it's finished. And I think that was it. I mean, not every drama though necessarily has to be like the best drama ever. This was more. At all. But I think the best way to describe this is serviceable.
But I think I've got to come to terms with the fact that drama isn't made the way it used to be for the majority of the stuff that's on screen.
You need to move on, basically, Luke.
Well, because we're getting a lot of more heightened. Everything's higher than it. Not higher. I don't mean higher in quality. I just mean everything's on. What am I trying to say? You know what I'm trying to say. Put words in my mouth.
Pitched at the lowest common denominator. There's they've lost sort of the subtleties. How's that? The sort of
and the emotion.
I get what you mean. I never sort of felt emotional, and I would agree with you. There were some really sort of clunky plot contrivances that you had to get over to enjoy. I when I watched it, because I think I almost watched it almost like a mini movie to me. They did try and portray Adrian Lester as sort of a bit smug, and I was like, it's Adrian Lester, he's far too charming. He just like comes across as a really nice guy.
I know, I imagine if I met him today...
I think the problem was that you were meant to sympathise with John Simm more, but because it was John Simm who can play a bit of a sort of dodgier character, and Adrian Lester playing this guy who's meant to be smug. I wonder if the roles have been reversed. Adrian Lester playing this sort of dad down on his luck, and John Simm.
Well, because let's face it, they're good enough actors that they could easily swap.
I mean, for me though, I would say, and I know I mentioned this previously, that I certainly connected with the characters more because I refer to their names, whereas Adrian Lester and John Simm, I didn't call them that at all. And I thought there was some good other performers. I like Lindsay Marshall as John Simm's wife.
Was really woefully underused. I thought she was
brilliant. The one scene that she was really in about her grief and just sort of trying to cope and things. There were moments where you went, yes, this is what the drama.
This is what it's supposed to. This is what you're supposed to be.
But the clunkier bits for me were A, the coffee shop hiring John Simm in the first place, B, him getting fired within about 3 days, and most of all, John's daughter Alana letting John Simm into the house, pretending to be someone from Oxfam.
And I love the fact that the replacement was daft, but I let myself go with that, and
I let myself go with this. You see, so maybe What do you think it was that didn't let you make yourself go, if that makes sense?
I think it's because I didn't understand John Simm's motivations, and I thought a lot of it was too clunky. The sort of overused walking into the operating theatre, the thing about when he went in, slipping at the back while they're going through the
he managed to get into a lot of places, didn't he?
Yeah, I could never see things from John Simm's point of view, I suppose.
I get you, I mean, I could understand his motivations, but it was hard to see things from his point of view. I think that's two different points.
Yeah, and
I think I can understand the character. I can understand that John Simm, thought Adrian Lester was holding something back, which he was. He was holding something back. But the way he went about it, it was saying, like, if you haven't got a lot of money, if you're a working class person, then you won't be listened to. You can go through all the formal channels, but you won't be listened to. Whereas because the doctor character had a lot of money, had this lovely house, had this lovely family, if it had gone the other way around, then he could use his influence, whereas John Simm, Dan didn't have any influence. I think that was the point of the plot and the motivations, that it was almost like jealousy boiling up, as well as the grief had manifested it in that way. You know, I found it clunky, but I found it enjoyable enough. It was a TV drama, not trying to be a masterpiece.
I think the problem with it is, like The Replacement. I understood it was Vicky McClure and Morgan Christie, and I could see both sides of that. I could see the paranoia.
Yeah, I didn't like that as much as you did.
Yeah, I know, it's interesting, isn't it? But I could. That made sense to me. Somebody taking over and blah blah blah, and that didn't have. And maybe it's this as well. That didn't have ads. That was on BBC One. ITV clearly has ads, and while you're waiting for the adverts to finish, you say to the people you're watching it with, "Well, would he really get?"
You see, that's it, because I didn't watch this with ads, and I didn't watch it with other people.
Yeah. If you don't ask questions, you can enjoy
I agree.
it to a degree. As soon as you ask something or question something, to me it all falls apart. And I don't think Mike Bartlett is as good as a writer as people make him out to be from Dr. Foster. I don't know. And I have said on Twitter, and people have agreed, that in lesser hands,
it depends what you think. In lesser
hands, this wouldn't have held my attention at all. It was mainly down to the great acting from Adrian Lester.
And they had great chemistry, I thought, as well. I think the best scenes were those two on screen together. But can I just ask, how do you quantify great writer? Because I think he can tell a story, and he can tell an interesting and complex story. But if you're talking about writing sort of believable characters, then I don't think it depends what you're talking about. How you quantify
I suppose
being a great writer.
That is a good question. I suppose I just mean making me connect to the world.
Buy into the world.
Like the good place is a ridiculous premise, right? But those people behind that are good enough to make me believe it. The Americans is an even more ridiculous premise, and it could be stupid. You know, these spies of the 80s living under... But I believe it. There's not an element of it.
You went all over the place with the first series of Dr. Foster, didn't you?
Yeah, it was different to what I was used to.
Well, we'll have to see what press is like. I think that's going to be the sort of...
That sounds like the most down-to-earth... show he's done, doesn't it? Really. It's interesting that both of these I didn't connect with, and that both of them are from playwrights. I've never seen a stage play, and it makes me think, would I like it, or would I be too aware of the stuff they're saying? I don't know.
I think you find it hard to relax into things and just go with things.
No, because sometimes I can I started, because I'm living in 2010 at the moment. I started Borgen this week because I was genuinely worried that I was just turned off by everything, and I thought, well, I'll try something completely different. I don't like political things, and I watched two of them, and I was really enthused again. So I know what you're saying, but I think if the world is there and I can connect, then that's all I need. And I just haven't found anything of late that does that.
I think drawing a line under Trauma, I would say that it is, enjoyable. Sort of, I think you can switch your brain off and watch it. I thought the performances were very good. Sort of almost the entire cast. I could take or leave Jemima Reefer, really.
I always have felt that way about her.
Yeah, and it's one of those you enjoy in the moment. I would recommend watching it as one big chunk, almost like one big film, because I think that works better than... And that's probably why this would have been disastrous had they put it on over 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I wonder whether they knew that deep down.